Good evening and welcome, everyone. I'm Earl Butch Graves, Jr., CEO of Black Enterprise, and it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's town hall, Shaping the Culture of Wealth, sponsored by our good friends at Nationwide. Before we begin, I want to thank our host sponsor for their partnership. Nationwide brings to the table a deep commitment to economic empowerment and an array of award-winning wealth-building tools that serve individuals and businesses alike. We thank them for their knowledgeable input and investment. Secondly, let me share our most profound appreciation to our esteemed guests for their participation and spirited engagement. Before you meet them, a few brief words. The creation of an authentic culture of wealth is the foundation of our mission at Black Enterprise. Since our media company's founding more than 50 years ago, we have strived to place Black wealth at the epicenter of a broader narrative by addressing head-on the economic disparities that historically have pushed our communities to the margins. To that end, Black Enterprise has become the trusted, valued resource for wealth-building strategies for African Americans, ranging from homeownership, investing, entrepreneurship, and retirement planning. We proudly serve and sustain our audience with life-changing practical steps to achieve wealth and financial independence. But while Black Enterprise and Black Americans have made significant progress over the past 5 decades, disparity and policy challenges continue to put undue limits on the progress of Black wealth. In fact, circumstances have taken an alarming turn in recent years. On every measure, from home ownership to retirement security, African Americans continue to lag behind white Americans and every other ethnic group when it comes to our wealth. Here's the disturbing financial picture. In 2022, the median overall net worth of white households of $285,000 was more than 6 times that of African American households of $45,000. Studies also show that a Black person with a college bachelor's degree has a median net worth that is only 2/3 of the median net worth of a white person with a high school degree. The current Black home ownership rate of 44% is roughly the same level as it was in 1970 and substantially behind the white home ownership rate of 72%. The average white family currently has more than $12,000 in emergency savings, while the average Black family has a mere $2,000 in emergency savings. According to an AARP report, Blacks in the workforce ages 51 to 64 are the least likely among all ethnic groups to have a qualified retirement account. And for those that have one, their median balance is well below that of similarly aged white adults across all income levels. 1/3 of whites at the highest income level have a median retirement account balance of $292,000 versus $140,000 for African Americans with the same income levels. For those at income levels between $75,000 to $100,000, the stock market participation of whites stands at 27% versus just 12% for Blacks. Despite some short-term recessions and economic downturns, the stock market over the past 50 years has been and continues to be the single greatest wealth creator available to everyone. In fact, according to the Road to Zero Wealth, published by Prosperity Now and the Institute for Policy Studies, the median wealth of Black Americans will fall to zero by 2053 if current trends continue. Consider today's virtual town hall session, Shaping the Culture of Wealth, a course correction. The forum is part of our ongoing coverage and advocacy specifically designed to advance your plans for multi-generational wealth creation. Our goals for this session are as follows. We will share an overview of African American wealth status and discuss how to establish achievable financial goals. We will address institutional barriers to Black wealth and discuss strategies to circumvent these obstacles. Our panelists will share their models for wealth building and best practices for financial empowerment. And finally, we will offer recommendations to narrow the wealth gap and set us on the path to building and maintaining financial prosperity. Here to get us started and moderate the discussion is an award-winning journalist of the highest caliber and a dear friend of Black Enterprise, Mr. Ed Gordon.
Thanks, Butch. It's my privilege and pleasure to serve as moderator for the first Black Enterprise Virtual Town Hall for 2024. We'll explore the economic health of African American families and how we can develop the necessary strategies and tools to promote financial prosperity and engage in shaping a viable, sustainable culture of wealth. And we have a great panel for you. First, John Hope Bryant, founder, chairman, and CEO of the Atlanta-based Operation Hope. For more than 30 years, the organization has accelerated financial opportunity for people of color through an array of tools and resources. Next, Taurus Richardson, founder and CEO of IMB Partners, a leading private equity firm specializing in government contractors in food, energy, cybersecurity, and IT services. They have more than $1 billion in revenues across its portfolio of investments. And finally, Christy Martin Rodriguez, Senior Vice President of the Nationwide Retirement Institute for Nationwide Financial. In her role, she leads teams responsible for advocating for and educating members, partners, and industry leaders on issues impacting the ability to gain a secure financial future. John, let me start with you. It's interesting and frightening in some ways, the statistic that Butch introduced to us that by 2053, if things don't change, if the current trends are the same, it's predicted that the average wealth of Black Americans will be zero. You've been out here a long time preaching literacy, the idea of gaining control of one's future economically. I'm curious what you would say when you look at that number, that prediction, and look at what has too oft fallen on deaf ears in our community. What resonates, what is working, and what do we need to do better?
Man, there's so much into that question. Of course, somebody as brilliant as you would tee it up with substance first and right on target. I'll try to make this as crisp as I can. Much respect, by the way, to Black Enterprise and to Nationwide and all the others associated with you, this presentation and you. Look, I was in Africa 4 weeks ago. My African brothers and sisters have high self-esteem and low confidence. There are exceptions to every rule. But they've got family structure, they got mom and dad, they got an uncle who's Black, a father who's Black, a wife who's Black, they got a mayor who's Black, a governor who's Black. They have high self-esteem, but they have low confidence because they've not yet succeeded in a first-rate market economy. They're not quite sure their skills are going to lean in. We have the opposite situation. We have high confidence and typically low self-esteem because of racism, because of slavery, Jim Crow, and being told for 40 years the same rhetoric. So that Malcolm X quote, we've been bamboozled, we've been tricked, we've been fooled, and we're looking for love in all the wrong plaplaces. And our priorities as a result of that are confused because we're confused, we're emotional about things we should be rational about. So example, if you have that situation, you probably have a surviving mindset, which means that a good portion of us are probably depressed, clinically undiagnosed depressed, African Americans, not African Africans, not African Caribbeans. And if racism was the only thing, by the way, Ed, all Blacks, African Caribbean, African Africans, African Americans would have the same economic plight. It's not the case. So we're brilliant. Why? What happened with us? Again, I've just mentioned self-esteem, and as a result of that, mindset. So a surviving mindset creates a different kind of decision-making matrix. So we're concerned about where's that dollar, where's that bag, where's that money, where's it? It's today. Whereas you build wealth in your sleep. So 41% of Black people own a home, 41 to 43%. What's the easiest way to build wealth in America? Home ownership. But people will talk themselves out of buying a home or owning a home. But we will, and this is loving criticism here, we'll go rent uptown to somebody who don't want us in a place we can't afford with something we don't own about pizza and talk about stuff in the cocktail bar downstairs about stuff that don't matter versus buying a house in the hood on the worst house in the best block in the hood, buy it, rehab it, rent it, and by the way, and use minority vendors and own it. Do that 3 times, you have $1 million net worth. So if you have one Black person on every block that does that, you change everything for us. So look, there's more to it than that. 96% of our Black businesses don't have an employee. We can go on this infinitum, but we are genius. We are brilliant. When the rules are published and the playing field is level, we kill it. But no one taught us about capitalism and free enterprise and economics and ownership. Freeman's Bank, 1865, you know that story. So it's not like we got the memo and screwed it up. We never got the memo, and thank God there's a Black enterprise. It's like the Black Wall Street Journal that's at least trying to keep us straight, if not set us straight. But we really have got to knock it off. Like, we've got to start having a serious conversation about what's going to matter most, because I was concerned about this in 2020 when George Floyd's murder happened and we had this third Reconstruction period. From the streets to the suites. The last movement was in the streets. That was the Civil Rights Movement. Second Reconstruction, my mentor Andrew Young and others. First Reconstruction after slavery. I was concerned a little bit after George Floyd's murder. I'm definitely concerned now with AI. Definitely concerned, because it took us 1850 to 1910, America, to go from horse and buggy to automobiles. Changed everything. Automobiles were horses were the most valuable asset in the world in 1850, 1860, 1870, 1880, 1890. By 1910, it was glue. And we're going to go with AI from what we think the world looks like to what we can't recognize in 5 years. And who's most at risk? Hello. So yeah. I'm very optimistic, but I'm also very concerned, so I'm ringing the bell.
Christy, let me ask you this. It's interesting what John suggested there in terms of mindset. I think about the industry that you're in, and we'll get into specifically what you do, particularly about being ready for retirement, which too few of us are. But I think about what I would hear from my aunts and grandmothers and the like, and they had a certain understanding, though they had far less, of what they needed to do to secure, if nothing else, the home front. I think about having insurance policies that they would bank on. I think about the idea of being more conscious of spending. You know, part of the freedom we finally won is that we went hog wild and spent a lot. But I'm curious how you look at the idea of the mindset that brought us to the point that John talked about, and the mindset after the freedom and the parlay of dollars that we saw, that in comparison we all know is very little. But I'm curious how you see mindset as you talk to people around the country.
Yeah, very profound question, and I love John's response. And I want to take it from what you just described, Ed, growing up with your elders. When I think about it from an insurance standpoint, spot on. I believe it does come down when we do research and we cultivate insights around Black communities of the scarcity mindset. And so when I think of it in terms of insurance products, what we often see is Black Americans actually have more insurance, life insurance, than the general population. We're at something like 56% of all African Americans have life insurance, as opposed to 52% of our white counterparts. But going back to that mindset conversation, what we often see is that we're underinsured. So we have been brought up to think we're going to purchase life insurance as a mechanism to have enough for our final expenses. And I've been there. I've been, sitting around the Thanksgiving table and it's been, hey, make sure you have enough so you don't have a GoFundMe. So I got my life insurance policy. And so we're really underinsured from that mindset that we don't take life insurance like some of our white American counterparts and say, how can I use this for income replacement? How can I use this to create generational wealth? And so that mindset of being very limited in terms of how we make those purchases are, very profound. And it to me, it was just startling to see that we purchase some of the largest consumers of purchasing it, but not necessarily the ones of thinking about ways that we can continue to generate wealth. Another area when you think about that too, that I want to make sure we delve into, because this is so prevalent in the Black community and a lot of the research that we do, is Black Americans are 3 times more likely to caregive for our loved ones. Mm-hmm. But we're also the number one community when we caregive that we solely focus on, I'm just not going to put mama in a home. I'm not going to do this. We don't think about the fact that, hey, this will take away millions, sometimes thousands of dollars that can come in because you're caregiving and you're not being compensated. And so one of the opportunities that we definitely also see from an insurance standpoint, going back to that mindset, is how do we get more Black Americans, whether they're aging or they're in that younger demographic in terms of caregiving, to understand the power of purchasing long-term care insurance. And it honestly goes down not just to mindset, it's education. You'll be amazed at how many times we've gone to the community and you're like, oh, I thought I had that with long-term disability, or doesn't Medicare cover that? And so it's even that education around, we know we're going to do that. We know how we're set up to position for our families, but we're often not clear on how this can be a wealth changer and a driver, because we've only been taught about the immediacy of how we need to take care of expenses rather than thinking about this, cross-generationally.
Hey, we should also note that it isn't just about mom or grandmom. It could be a spouse.
Absolutely.
It could be very early on that you need that. So that's something that we should get into. Taurus, if I may, let me lean on what your world has been, and that is, when people talk about equity firms and the like, the majority of folks who don't play in that field see it as, the kind of shiny thing on the hill. They don't know anything about it. It's kind of the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain. Yet we've left a lot of money on the table because we've chosen to play lotteries. And that's not to say don't go run and buy a lottery ticket when it's up to $1 billion, $1.5 billion if you just want to have some fun. But that should not be your plan. What do you do to make sure that people understand that what you do isn't smoke and mirrors? It's not anything to be afraid of.
Yeah, it's a great question, Ed. Similarly, honored to be here. Thank you, Black Enterprise, Christy and Nationwide. Thank you for the sponsorship. If I just go backwards, life insurance is a mechanism for savings and a mechanism for creating stability as you get older and transferring wealth to your family in a very effective way. And we underutilize it. One of the things, John said was 41% of Blacks own homes or have home ownership. And yes, we'd like that to be higher. But the truth of the matter is, if we had 41% Black business ownership, we would make a lot of headway too. And so we can talk private equity and, a roadmap to creating $100 billion business or $1 billion business. But the reality is that for every Black business that's owned, they're 3 times more likely to hire Black employees. And that can be family, or that can be people within communities. And that matters from the standpoint of keeping the dollar inside of our community, as well as making sure others in our community have that first chance for a job. That really is a subjective decision more often than it is an objective decision. So then it becomes, how do we start the business ownership mindset is the question. And for me, my mom and dad were, high school graduate for my mother, and a dropout in high school for my dad. But they read self-help books. And by the time I was 8 years old, they had a dream to basically buy a business, and they wanted to get into the cocktail lounge business or the bar business. And rather than starting it, they went out and tried to find a bar that was for sale, mostly because of the barrier entry of having a liquor license in Illinois was very difficult. So it was easier to buy and transfer a liquor license than it was to start and apply for a liquor license, given the laws in Illinois. And so I watched them buy a business for $120,000 in 1978. And they got half the money from a bank, and they went out and raised half the money from the community. They had maybe 2,000, but they went door to door and talked to literally 500 to 600 individuals, from the dentist to the teacher to the family member. And they raised money in small chunks, $50, $1,000, $500. And they pulled together the money from friends and a little bit of family to make that first investment. They were able to return the money to investors within 3 years. They were able to pay off the bank loan, and so they now have that equity ownership or value creation. And most importantly, we've hired and employed over 1,000 people over the last 45 years in that local community. And so it funded me and my brother going to college, going to law school and Harvard Business School. In my case, it enabled us to hire mostly all of my family worked at our business at some point. And I just want to talk about the simple steps of having a mindset of buying a business and not only creating wealth for yourself, but able to multiply it by the people you can hire, and by the wealth you create as you pay down your debt and grow the equity value of your business.
John, I want to ask you, when we look at the climate today, when we look at the questionable future of DE&I in many places, the idea of entrepreneurship has to be something that we look, I think, more at than we have. We know the understanding that we were more entrepreneurial prior to and during Reconstruction, after the fact, in Tulsa and all of the things that happened. It became this: go get a government job, go get, your benefits and be stable. We're in a different place now. I want you to tell me, as you go across the country, particularly with the younger generations that are now coming of age, what are you hearing from them? What are you telling them? Because they have a different mindset. Our generation was, you wanted the corner office, you wanted 3 Sonys and 2 Lexuses in the garage. This generation is different. What are you hearing? What do you like, and what do you dislike?
Yeah, so rainbows after storms. You cannot have a rainbow without a storm first. So both Taurus and Christy laid out the situation and the current storm. And I had talked about it. Here's the rainbow. My mother's generation wanted to cash a check, civil rights. This generation, I call it silver rights. You got to say it slowly, by the way. Silver rights. This generation wants to write the check. It's quite inspiring, and not that flossy thing that was 10 years ago, where they just wanted to look the part. Mm-hmm. Now, and I really wish I could say this as the way I want to, but I'm going to be appropriate. But you can fill in the blanks of what I'm trying to say. People want to know, quote, how does stuff work? So insert another word for stuff. How does stuff work? They want to know. Black people want to know. Young Black people. How does this stuff work, John? I'm tired of being played with. I'm tired of somebody else messing with my life and my future. Hire me when they want to, fire me when they want to, let me in their club. No. Not one ounce of my self-esteem now depends on your acceptance of me. How does this stuff work so I can do it for myself? Because the only real freedom is probably financial freedom. And nobody was more shocked than me. I've been doing this 30 years at Operation Hope, and I started in 2017 because people say, oh, that's a nonprofit stuff he's doing. He forgot I was an entrepreneur. I started the Promise Homes Company with nothing in 2017. It's now the largest minority owner of single family rental homes in America, about $200 million. I sold it to some investors a couple years ago, still a majority shareholder. So I own 700 homes. I know it's possible. No government assistance, just went at it while still running Operation Hope. So I started this media stuff, doing the social media. I got tired. I'm like, I'm just tired of messing around. I'm going to tell you straight what was on my mind, and you can dismiss me, curse me out on social media. And just the opposite happened. I would talk straight to people, and people like, yeah, okay. Now he said, that's okay, they start calling me okay, okay, tell me, he's not lying. There's all these phrases they come at me that I learn all kind of jargon now, like say less and all kind of things they're telling me. And then all of a sudden, millions of views a week, Ed, for me just talking straight to people. They just were waiting for somebody to come at them straight, but also saying, okay, now here's how you can do it. Mm-hmm. So that's been quite inspiring. And to Taurus's point, Operation Hope, since George Floyd's murder, we announced $1 million Black business initiatives funded by $130 million from Shopify. And I went on a program that the brother said, well, okay, why is Shopify doing this? Like, what's the catch? Response: they want you as a customer. Mm-hmm. Isn't that what you want, by the way? Mm-hmm. There's no catch. They want to do good and do well. And they were like, yeah, okay, I'm good with that. 400,000 Black businesses in 4 years, Ed. And there's only 3.1 million Black businesses in America. And these are now connected to Shopify. So they have an e-commerce platform, which is the future, at least part of the future. So actually quite inspiring that they want to unpack the mechanics, the machinery of how it works. And they want somebody to walk them through the steps. So this actually is quite inspiring to me. Mm-hmm. I'm not patting people on the head. I'm not having happy talk. I'm telling you straight that I think you're on the wrong track. Knock that off. Start doing this. And people were like, okay. And there may be a little bit of debate back and forth, but when I hit them with some facts, they accept it. I like math, Melody Hobson quote, because it doesn't have an opinion. And that's what this young population wants stuff to make sense. It's very encouraging. We could talk forever, by the way, Christy, about the insurance piece and and as you said, about taking care of our parents. My mom just passed the glory last September, and I'm wealthy. And that $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 a month check I had to stroke, that wasn't no joke. Now I was happy to do it. I could do it, but in order to take care of my mother, and really it could have been $10,000 a month actually. Aside from her Social Security, aside from her insurance that she had, this whole generation is getting older, right? And we are natural love bugs, so we're going to want to take care of our elders. Mm-hmm. Are we prepared for that conversation, right? There's so much in here.
Hey, Ed, if I can just come at for a quick second.
Absolutely.
I talked to my son who's 23. He had a college roommate over or at his house when I was there. And he's like, hey, man, I have this deal with a large music company, and I have a separate deal with a earlier stage music company. And what I want to figure out is how do I negotiate for a smaller salary and 10% equity, right? So I believe this generation is more focused on equity ownership. I believe athletes and entertainers have shown us that we're no longer looking for a sponsorship deal, a licensing deal. We want a unlimited sort of upside by having equity participation in deals.
So let me dig into that and then follow up on your point. But one of the things that I'm seeing that we need to also figure out within that, and I agree with you 100%, they are far more savvy than generations before. Yet I know what you preach is the idea of being scalable. And in the end, that is going to be what kind of pushes us past the line that we've not been able to venture past. Give me an idea of, and follow up on your point, but how do we make sure that they get there?
Yeah, it's a real question, right? So I believe 90% of small businesses, pardon me, 90% of startups fail. And so we've gone through the George Floyd area where, lots of money has been pushed to Black America in the last 3 to 4 years to encourage, new ventures and startups, et cetera, et cetera. And the truth of the matter is 90% of startups fail, whereas less than 20% of acquisitions fail. And so the question is, how do we get more of our people to have a mindset of buying a business that's already established, that is successful, not a turnaround, not a declining business, but a successful business where one of these, aging, sort of business owners, 60 years or older, doesn't have a kid who wants to own the business, has healthcare issue, has a divorce. Those are the reasons why people sell, are now in the market to sell a business that's got $5 million, $10 million, $25 million, 50 of revenue. And how do we buy a base business just like you would buy a home? You raise 80% mortgage and you go find 20 of equity to buy a home. In a business, you can borrow anywhere from 60 to 80% of a debt, loan product, and then only invest 20 to 40% equity. And again, like my parents, go talk to your friends, go talk to your previous, bosses and owners, your schoolmates, et cetera. Grind to find the money, but get in the business of ownership. I think people think about it from a startup perspective, and that's cool. I think this new generation has more opportunity with social media, with AI. It's all new. And so finding ownership there is helpful. But there's a ton of businesses for sale. Every day, 6,000 to 10,000 businesses are sold annually. And more of us can buy into it, a more successful, safer business to start than they can by starting up.
Christy, let me ask you this, and I see you, John, but follow up, Christy, but I'd also like to ask you, because as you go around, I'm often interested in what we hear from everyday people, those of us that do this kind of speak in platitudes, right? But everyday people don't always see it that way. I'm curious what you hear when we talk about generational wealth and acquiring a business that's already there, and they just see that as impossible because they don't know that money isn't quite as hard to get as we believe it to be. But there's certain things that you have to have. You can't go in with crap credit and assume that you're going. I mean, there are just certain things that we have to learn and do. I'm curious what you are hearing.
Oh, tag me in, Ed. So first, I want to just tell Taurus and John, like, you are literally living in my living room right now. I have a daughter that's getting ready to graduate from Spelman, and her whole mindset, she's a biochemistry major, is totally different. It's about how am I going to acquire more wealth? I sit down with her and go through her 401k, et cetera. Like, she is very set on that and negotiating, which I think is so powerful no matter what industry they are in. But Ed, I love the question that you posed because it made me think about a few things. But the one I want to center on is where we found opportunity at Nationwide is we embarked on some research. So you're talking about everyday people. From 2018 to 2020, we went out and conducted research with the American College to understand the lack of Black financial professionals in our industry. And this was so powerful, gentlemen, because it was twofold. We looked at 33 historically Black colleges and universities and why students weren't going into the financial services field. And then we looked at those individuals that were early in career. And to your point of everyday people, resoundingly, and I tear up thinking about it every time, is that over 98% perceived they wouldn't be successful, and over 80% knew nothing about the industry. Now, this is one of the most lucrative industries, and we can take Taurus's comments and John's comments. I look at that as all being kind of in the financial services realm. And so what we did at Nationwide is saying we're sitting on this research post George Floyd. It does nothing for Christy Rodriguez to go out with this research. So we partnered with 7 historically Black colleges and universities and over 8 at the time financial services institutions and industry partners to say, how can we get not only students to come in from a recruitment standpoint, but how do we invest and sustain? And so when I think about business ownership, some of the things I talk to students about are it's wonderful to think about a career if you want to be an entrepreneur as a wealth manager or an asset manager, and you can make millions, but a lot of them have never been exposed to that.
Mhm.
And that focus alone was so profound because we said, hey, we can't do it all alone. How are we going to come together? How are we going to work with some of these underfunded institutions to create a pipeline, but also do things like, to your point, how are we giving you ways that you're thinking about wealth beyond just getting a job and collecting a paycheck? We brought in the gentlemen from Earn Your Leisure, Troy and Rashad, to talk to these students to create a way that we were looking at influencers coming in. We gave over $250,000 in scholarships in the first year alone to get their certification around being a certified financial planner. And then we did the same for those undergrad students to say, we're going to help you before you get out of college, get trained and committed to some of those skills and some of those tests that you'll have to have, such as your Series 7, to be in this industry. And I think it's so important because, to your point, a lot of these students and everyday people and young in career, they don't see it. Some of them are first generation in our industry. Some of them are first generation to some of the items that we're talking about, even with home ownership. And we felt if there's any way that we can take it and make it practical, we'll work again across and let them know we need you at every part of that ecosystem. So whether it's an entrepreneur, you're in marketing, you're in legal, you're in compliance, we need you to really drive and push the way that we're thinking about how we can not only understand financial education, but we can be a force in financial inclusion to change the paradigm shift in our communities. And so that's the feedback we get from everyday people is, thank you. Thank you for giving me, not only telling me about it, but giving me the tools and giving me the funding that I need in order to kind of see it and believe it. And again, we do things like mentorship, internships, hiring on the spots at these historically Black colleges in underserved communities to drive these individuals to understand the power of economic wealth.
John, talk about, if you will, and I saw you raise your hand, so pick up on that point as well. But the sense that I see of new areas of wealth building that our generation would have scoffed at because the environment was different. I'm a big art lover. And we see all of these entertainers now, from Jay-Z to Alicia Keys and others, getting into the art world. I remind people, though, you can't just go buy a picture. You have to learn the art world as you would to know that I'm buying this for an investment versus this just because I like it. I look at just buying gym shoes or sneakers, depending on what side of the country you are. You know, you used to think you're wasting money. You got 10 pairs. Well, if you're educated, those don't devalue anymore like they used to. So give me a sense of this new horizon that they have in front of us and how older folk need to understand you still need to learn as the environment changes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so excited about this conversation because I'm only frustrated that we're trying to put 200 years worth of history in about 45 minutes. And as Taras well knows, things that have been percolating for a while happen in an instant.
Yep.
Then once these industries, once these things take off, once they coalesce, they sort of take off. AI had been sitting there forever. Then it just took off, as but one example. What am I saying? Taras said something, and I don't know if I'm going to go back for a minute. I'm going to answer your question, Ed. I'm going to go back for a minute because I think it does partly answer your question. He snuck something in. I'm not sure if folks are paying attention. My man is very calm. He don't raise his voice like me. He's not excitable. He doesn't have to. He manages, substantial portfolio, a couple $1 billion worth of investable assets. When you got the power, you don't need to use it. And so he said, buy a business. But he can also say, I'll finance it. I'll give you the debt. I'll give you the equity. Sorry, I'll invest with you. Before that was Reginald Lewis needed Michael Milken. The last time we talked about $1 billion deal on Wall Street was my man, Michael Milken, financing Reginald Lewis, 85. But Taras can do that right now. Now, this is an and conversation, not an or conversation. Yes, most of these entrepreneurs that I'm creating and others are creating will probably fail in their business. It doesn't matter.
Right.
We're repairing is mindset.
Right.
Because all poverty, other than sustenance poverty, roof over your head, food on the table, reasonable health care, is mindset. Is the glass half full or is it half empty? Depends who's looking at the glass.
Right.
If you can, you believe you can. You're right. All right. So we have got to have a hustler, builder mindset. I'm going to get over the rounded to it. I'm going to get through it. I'm not arrogant. I'm not pompous. But I'm confident. I have a quiet confidence, and I'm coming that way. I'm an engineer. I'm a finance manager. I own a law firm. I don't work there. I'm an athlete who's going to become a billionaire by crossing over into business. By the way, every athlete and every entertainer became a billionaire that we know of by crossing over into corporate and the business. 100% of them. We got to learn to do the quiet stuff. And by the way, if your CPA is at the club with you and you're a rapper, you got the wrong CPA, right? So we got to quiet the noise. We have to understand the biggest business in the world is real estate. I mean, you can go on. I mean, a third of this economy is financial services. A third is healthcare. Do you know how small arts and entertainment is? Music? It's minuscule. And when you get in that, the money is actually not in performing. Quincy Jones would say, if you think you're in the music business and you don't own music rights, licensing rights, publishing rights, or some kind of rights, you're actually not in the music business. You're a temporary performer. What you want to do is own the lenses. I'm sorry, not music. I'm talking about TV now. You want to own the camera and rent it out. You want to own the lenses. These are businesses and rent them out to production companies who rent them every week. You want to be a leasing company for cars, providing the tax benefit. We can go on this forever. The point is, everything is on tap right now. It's not an or conversation, it's an and conversation. And business is different from entrepreneurship. Taurus is dealing with established businesses and established industries that are ripe for acquisition. We need the right relationship capital, which we're starting to develop now. If you hang around 9 broke people, you'll be the 10th. And you need to be able to call them for the viable business opportunity, including investing in things like art. You need a private banker. I can't tell you which rapper I was talking to, but he banked with the teller down the street. I mean, you worth $100 million and you banking at what are you doing? You should know the CEO, the CFO. I mean, you should be in the private banking department. This should frustrate me, and it does, but it mostly inspires me because it's not like somebody gave us a memo, Ed, on how free enterprise capitalism and all this works, and we screwed it up. We never got the memo. You're giving them the memo in programs like this. And I think you're going to see all of Black America scale in the next 10 years. Let me say this, because you mentioned diversity and inclusion earlier. And I said this in a speech I gave last week for, I think it was Time Magazine. There are not enough, for the first time in history, in 1950, 90% of America was was white. In 1950, 90% of America was white. Now, I'm not making a racial comment. Today, there are not enough college-educated, successful white men to drive GDP for the next 30 years. Mm-hmm. That's not a racial comment. It's not provocative. It's math.
Just numbers.
So they need us. This is a ridiculous conversation. Without diversity and inclusion, you've got half of this country in 20 years, Ed, who can't finance the other half of the country that's trying to retire. The only way we're the largest economy in the world sustained is if all of us become stakeholders and owners in the next decade. And I believe it's going to happen. It has to happen.
Let me ask, Christy, I'll start with you. John keeps talking about the memo. Write the memo for me right now, Christy, that you would send. What would you advise people in the immediate future to do to start to kind of place themselves, and I'm talking about now that everyday man, everyday woman, to place themselves on better footing?
Yeah, the memo, when I think about the average American, and I do want to focus, on Black Americans, but I'll go broader first, is the first thing we have to do is we have to start planning. We have to get educated. some practical things I would say is the first thing you do, maximize. If you work for an employer, maximize those contributions. Really think about, now what can you balance in terms of what you save and what you spend. The biggest crisis we deal with in insurance right now, and I'm so proud we have our president of our retirement solutions business. He is out in DC and he's going to testify in a couple days, is this focus on emergency savings and also, college debt that we don't often talk about. And people are making trade-offs. I don't know how many of us know this, but over 37% of all Americans across, all demographic lines, across generational lines, wealth lines, cannot afford a $400 emergency crisis. And then if you take that with the Black community, 74% in low and moderate communities cannot afford a $400 financial crisis. And so that in itself speaks to the fact that, one, we really need to educate again. If you have mechanisms in which you can start saving for retirement, because there will be longevity, you can do that. I really want to educate also Black Americans around legislation like the Secure Act that just came out, that if you do have an emergency crisis, how you can gather money from your employer retirement account if need be to save or to pull it out to actually utilize for a crisis and not be penalized in terms of your savings. And so I almost take it down another layer, because to some degree, the individuals that we work with and the research we gather, and I'm in a phenomenal conversation with intelligent individuals today, that's almost going to be their second conversation. They're often thinking, how can I survive today? And again, that goes to mindset, because they can survive today, but how can I also plan for tomorrow? And the biggest thing that I always say, no matter, again, what generation I'm talking to, is you likely won't be able to work as long as you think you will, and you will live longer than what you anticipate. And so how do you create a balance, live in a budget, but then also think about what are some of those other streams of income that have been brought up this afternoon as we're having this conversation, that can be powerful for you, and also how you're creating generational wealth throughout your family. And so again, Ed, one of the things I will just tag on as part of that we're also focused on, that we haven't talked about, is we're not a monolithic community, and we all know that. And so some of the needs that we're even delving into are women. What does that mean in terms of caregiving? And we brought that up earlier. A lot of individuals in our community are part of the LGBTQ plus community. They may not have the same legal rights, and how are they thinking about guaranteed income to care for themselves? We think about those with disabilities and special needs, but it always comes down to, if I could just say, get a financial planner if you can. If you can't, utilize resources that will become available. And then always think about what are some ways that you can create another way to create income streams and wealth that will last far beyond your lifespan.
And I would think that we also, when we talk about mindset, have to be mindful of the idea that if you are 25 and under, the world you were born into does not lend itself to look forward, to really look at a future, because it's been so devastating. You've grown up with George Floyd, a pandemic, wars. I mean, it is amazing. Now, that being said, people got through World War I and II, the Spanish American flu. I mean, all of those things. It can be done, but sometimes we think that these young people just all of a sudden came here. We've not been giving them the guidance, quite frankly, that they deserve and should have. Let me ask you, Taurus, if I may, one of the interesting things about your business, specifically, not your industry, but your business, is you've gotten into areas that oftentimes African Americans don't get into. I think about energy, cybersecurity, IT services, food, the food industry. We too long have been first pigeonholed and then not being equipped enough or wanting enough to look around and see what else is there. How would you suggest that we start to do that to build wealth as well? There's so many more avenues than most of us look down.
Yeah, I'll go back to go forward, right? So my parents were entrepreneurs, so my mindset was to get to ownership as soon as possible. In high school, I sold popcorn out of my locker. If any kid is 18, 16 to 22, start selling Girl Scout cookies, Boy Scout cookies, Christmas trees, popcorn. Learn how to be told no, learn how to sell something. Right out of college, my goal was to be a millionaire by 21. I left high school at 16. I graduated and started pursuing entrepreneurial activity. I had a goal of basically owning a business within 3 years out of undergrad. I did that by going to Africa. I started an investment business there that's around 30 some years later. After Harvard Business School, my goal was to own my own business within 3 years. In 3 years, I left a firm where I got apprenticed for 2 years, and I started a private equity firm that raised $130 million. 2010, know that things happen. I got fired. I nearly went bankrupt over the next 4 years. But I still said, I'm not going to get a job. I'm going to figure out how to do this entrepreneurship. I'm going to figure out how to borrow to keep me afloat. And I'm going to figure out how to buy the next business. From 2014 to 2024 right now, I bought 9 companies. I created a $1 billion business. And I got into these spaces of utilities, IT, cyber, and insurance related products, all because I tried to go where people weren't at. And so by focusing on the things that are not as sexy, when I went to the door, I went to the window as an African American business owner or investor, it was just fewer people at the door. And I was able to make the case that I might be a good partner to that founder or owner, as I gave them 80% of their money on exit and they retained 20% to work with me. But then I bought control of their business. The takeaway is this is not a mystery. You have to have an entrepreneurship and business ownership mindset, and you have to start every day. Like, jobs are your enemy, because at the end of the day, you give them all your money and all your time, and they give you a paycheck. And the government takes 30 to 40% of that paycheck for taxes, and you're living check to check. You're not focused on a salary. You're focused on equity ownership, as John said at the beginning of this conversation, that makes money when you sleep. And if you live and die by trying to build the ownership over time, you'll win. We all played Monopoly growing up. You got to buy the properties before you can put houses on them, and then you can put hotels on them. And every time people pass go and they land on your stuff, they pay you a fee when you're asleep. If you don't own stuff, people can't pay you a fee when you sleep.
John, let me ask you something. You talked about it earlier. I want you to broaden the scope of it, if you will, open the aperture a bit. I think about the aftermath of George Floyd and how too many people, quite frankly, thought, oh, this is a game changer. It's a sea change. There was this sense of just throw the money there. Corporations often saw it as, we'll make it right that way. We saw too many African Americans just being happy to see the coffers open for a moment, and now are starting to see the reality that it was changing very little other than maybe some guilt. I'm curious how you start to hold, whether they be banking institutions, corporations, how do you take them to task justifiably and then hold them accountable for doing business with you, not for you, but with you?
Citigroup report, 2020. Black man who was vice chairman at the time made sure the report was done. Showed non-emotionally that discrimination against Blacks from the year 2000 to the year 2020 cost the biggest economy in the world, the sole superpower in the world, $16 trillion. And if you just knock it off, just stop it, you pick up $1 trillion a year. I like math, as I said earlier, because it doesn't have an opinion. We have never had, God has a sense of humor, Ed. We've never had a situation like we have right now, where literally the country can't succeed without us. It's never happened in the history of America. And so you take that $1 trillion a year number, the economy is about 21, 22 trillion, the biggest economy in the world. And you say, is there 2-3% of GDP locked up, untapped from people of color, specifically African Americans? Of course there is. I mean, what's a drug dealer? An illegal, unethical, entrepreneur. They understand import, export, finance, marketing, wholesale, retail, customer service, security, territory, and logistics. What is a gang leader? A frustrated union organizer. I can go with this all day. There's gifts that are not cultivated or tapped. And by the way, Taurus, I'm going to agree and get a little friction here. Yes, we should want to be owners when we can. You and I, we write checks. We make payroll. I have 400 employees, so I get that. But the risk tolerance is also higher. So some people just want to chill. They want to, and we need those people too. So you want to be an employee, you're still human capital. You're just trading that lower risk level for a paycheck. Business owner, higher risk level. Entrepreneurship, crazy people like me, the highest risk reward level. Getting back to your point. I make a business case, Ed. That's all I do. I have 300 locations for Hope Inside, serving 1,000 facilities right now. I've got a contract for half of all Truist branches. There's 2,000 branches. Half of them will be Hope Inside branches. They're not doing that for charity. I have a contract with Wells Fargo for 130 branches of Hope Inside. They're not doing that for charity. You do 2 branches for charity. I have a contract for Bank of America, another 100 locations, I believe it is. That's not charity. U.S. Bank, that's not charity. 20% of all the biggest bank in Tennessee, First Horizon Bank. That's not charity. Why are they doing it? Because half of Black folks have a credit score below 620. That's a problem, and it's a market opportunity. They're declining people for loans. We think it's racism, but the problem is your credit score is so bad is tore up from the flow up. The bank can't say yes even if they wanted to, but we don't know that. So we go in. We're the only nonprofit allowed to operate out of a bank branch. So we go in, get your credit score up 50 points in 6 months, 100 points in 18 months, debt down $3,800, savings up $2,200. There's somebody making $48,000 a year. Now, when we finish with you, Ed, you started out, you were Black, now you're green. So now we're getting the bank out of the no business and back into the yes business at scale. So we have got an opportunity here. Yes, we had it almost too easy after George Floyd. If you were Black and could breathe in a mirror in 2021, somebody would stop and put a check in your hand. And we thought that was going to last forever. Fantasies don't last forever.
So, John, the one comment I'll make to you is like Black Enterprise has been a magazine that has an audience of the bottom, the middle, and the upper, right? And for myself, I started reading Black Enterprise because it was on the, lunch table or the living room table when I was 10 years old, right? But for the examples, you can't be what you can't see, I wouldn't have known about Reginald Lewis. I wouldn't have known this industry exists.
Yeah.
So while the messages that we communicate may not hit everybody today, we got to make sure we hit the people where they're at. And for those who are going to college and aspirational about creating $1 million net worth, $10 million net worth, $100 million net worth, $1 billion net worth, you can't get there with a job. You must start figuring out how to own things as soon as possible, whether that be a home, whether that be insurance products, whether that be a business and or stock. You must start learning how to invest to increase your aperture, to increase your risk tolerance level for winning and losing. I lose a lot and I win a lot, but I want to learn how to have an unfair advantage when I put my money to work, so I have a lower chance of losing. And if somebody told me 80% of the time I start something I lose, and less than 20% of the time when I buy something I win, well, I'm going to try to learn how to buy something that's already established, whether it be a dollar store, a car dealership, again, in my family's case, a popcorn store, a bar. We never lost when we did those first investments. And so I'm just trying to increase people's mindset. We must be business owners, not necessarily venture startup owners, because it's a lower probability of you losing your money if you buy something that is proven out the gate. It's the same reason why people don't build houses. The majority of us buy a house because we don't have to learn how to do plumbing, electricity, and sort of carpentry. You buy something already in place, it's an easier way to get to home ownership.
Hard, you had me hello, brother. Don't worry. I'm with you. I just want the person to listen to this. That's my auntie and Ed's auntie and Chrissy's auntie to know that my mother worked an $18 an hour job for 32 years and had to die with $1 million net worth because she owned 7 homes. She bought those 7 homes and was prudent. So it's something for everybody. Ed, back to you. Sorry.
Yeah, can I
I was
add
going to
one
say, Christy,
comment,
pick
Ed,
up.
on
Yeah.
that? Yeah, I was going to say, and that's why I love the diversity of this panel, because I sit here and I represent someone who is in corporate America but has investments outside. And so I don't think it's an all or nothing approach. And to your point, I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, and I had a street where my entire family had a funeral home, hairdressers, cement company, a store. So I totally see it and I believe it. I took this path, but I felt in my heart deep down, for me, it wasn't an either or. And that's what I really want to educate with the communities that we serve. And it is starting off low. I'll tell you, as a woman in this industry, I didn't want to, I was always at that lower moderate investing. And it took for me to understand how I can multiply my income to make that shift. So I appreciate the diversity and the perspective that we're all coming at this, Ed, and just an appreciation for the dialogue.
And I remind people who watch these sessions that there is no golden key. If there was a golden key, we'd all go have it, take it to Home Depot or Lowe's, have them make another one, give it to your cousin, give it to your mom. There is no golden key. And these sessions will not give you the magic roadmap. But what we're asking you to do is think, and we're hoping that it will spark something in you, that you will either hear something you never heard before, or you'll want to learn a little bit more about what Mr. Richardson or Mr. Hope Bryant or Ms. Rodriguez said today, that you go ahead and you then Google what you need to do, since that's the favorite mode of learning today, seemingly. Let me do this as we are running up against the clock. I'd like each of you, and ladies first, Christy, I'll start with you, each of you to give a sense of that roadmap, though, the advice that you might give to people who are looking to, and I'll ask it to be broad in the sense of looking to move to the next level. So if you're the common person, you're looking to get away from living check to check. If you're making $100,000, but that, if a couple of things go wrong, I'm going to be in trouble. How do we make sure that, in fact, you can move to the next level? How do we take that next stair climb?
Yeah, and I'm going to be very practical with that approach. It's having a plan. You can't decide what the next move is without having a plan. So having a vision in mind. I heard, both John and Taurus like, hey, this is what I knew I wanted to do. And so I would say have that plan and visit that plan with your family. And so that you're all aligned. And I think once you start doing that, you can determine how are you going to save? How are you going to balance? Again, it's not an all or nothing approach. You don't have to put everything into your retirement savings and have nothing if there's an immediate situation that comes up. The other piece of advice I would give, and I say this all the time, if at all possible, and we have democratized this to some degree, work with a financial planner. Work with someone who, just as very much as you go to a doctor, to get checkups, work with someone that once you know what your goal is and you stick to that goal and you share it with your family and you do that personalized regular check-in, work with that professional or utilize free tools to ensure that you're going to be on track. And again, closing out, once you have the plan, you work the plan and you're working with that professional advisor, leave no money on the table. Yeah. If you are one of the people like me and you work for an employer, max out all the contributions you can get.
And not to be afraid to go to a planner, or the idea of thinking, well, I don't make 6 figures, so I don't need to do that. Even more so when you're making $25,000, $30,000, you really need somebody to help you at that point. Even more so.
Yeah, Ed, I just want to comment on that's so powerful. Before I was making, in the 6 figures, I went to a planner who taught me how I can do that by minimizing my debt. I had that I had that gratitude, that instant gratification. And that planner sat down with me and said, we can't even talk about you investing until you minimize your debt. Yeah. And so then that's when I came back with the plan. So you're absolutely right. It's never too early to start saving, planning, and talking to that professional.
Taurus, let me ask you for, some advice on those first steps.
Yeah. So for me, I wanted to be a millionaire by 21. And, I think everybody should have an opportunity to have 50 to 100 million enough net worth or better if they just say it. And so step one is, if you're pursuing financial wealth and freedom, declare it. Then number two, identify 3 role models that are 15 to 30 years senior to you, and 3 role models that are 3 to 7 years older than you, who are doing whatever it is that interests you. And I would add, that happen to be on an ownership path. And basically role model what they did and reverse it back and say, did they go to business school? Did they work an apprentice first? Did they start immediately after college? Did they spend 7 years in the company? But basically model direct and indirect people, because it's not like they're going to be in your friends in your community, but you can Google them, you can look at websites, you can look at books, etc. And then finally, be definitive. Like, I knew I wanted to be in my own business within 3 years from the time I made my first, departure from college. And by the time I left business school, it was important for me to go into business ownership. And because I had that mindset, I used the job I took as apprenticeship, as internship, as a placeholder for saving money so that I can do something entrepreneurial within year 2 to 3. And so that intentionality of getting to ownership within a certain amount of time, having role models that are doing what you think you might best be served at or most interested in, and then having some definitive, not only just goal and plan, but wealth, sort of goal, I think is helpful, because it helps you separate doing small stuff from big stuff. And I'll leave with one last comment. My mom told me to aim for the sun, because if I miss, at least I'll get the stars. And so too many of us aim too low, and it's crowded. But the more you aim for bigger things, it turns out fewer people are actually competing against you.
Great. John, take us home, man.
7553, Ed. 7 stands for credit scores, 700 credit scores. There's never been a riot in a 700 credit score neighborhood in all of America's history. 700 credit score neighborhoods don't riot, they go shopping. All of our problems are in 500 credit score neighborhoods, where you see a check casher next to a payday loan lender, next to a rent-to-own store, next to a title lender, next to a liquor store, next to a pawn shop, and a church down the street. And that's Black and brown urban and white rural. They're target marketing. And if you get your credit score to 700, the computer just says yes. The color's now green. That's number one. Number two is, I wrote a book called The Memo, and there's 5 pillars or 5 rules for your success. One is embrace a free enterprise system. It's what Taurus is really focusing on. 2, your mindset makes or loses you money. It's what Christy was talking about. 3, relationships are investments. And when you're trading art, a lot of that is that art world's connected through relationship capital. It's not just selecting the right art. You got to have people who read you in. And that's, you do a whole session on art investment. And I would encourage Black Enterprise to think about doing that. 4, be entrepreneurial. And it's a mindset and not just a mission. 5, spiritual capital is the start of true capital. We're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. The last 5 is pillars. That's my last book, The 5 Pillars of Success from Up From Nothing. And as much education as you can shove down your throat. That's what we're doing today. Financial literacy, understanding the math of the matter. How does capitalism work? Family structure and resiliency. Self-esteem and confidence. Those 2 things are different. Talked about that earlier. Role models and environment. If you hang around 9 broke people, you'll be the 10th. You'll model what you see. Ed, here's the magic. You take any 3 of those things. God forbid you have 4. You take any 3 of those things, you'll be successful. I don't care, any 3. Education, role models, and environment, and self-esteem and confidence. Education, family structure, role models. It doesn't matter which 3. And you get 4, you'll absolutely kill it. So there's a plan. And what do you do with that is what back to what Taurus has said. It's buy a business, start a business, or joint venture with a business. I'm the king of joint ventures. I find somebody who's smarter and bigger than me in an area where I'm not smart or big, where I bring value and they bring value, and 2 + 2 = 10. And you scale your enterprises. And I'm extremely optimistic, Ed, about the future. I am on fire. I think this financial literacy is a civil rights issue of this generation. And this topic we're talking about is going to be everything for the next 5 to 10 years. And thank you for being really an elder statesman in this space, you and Black Enterprise.
Well, I would say that I can't echo enough, and we don't talk about it enough, the idea of relationships. Because at the end of the day, people deal with people they know and they're comfortable with. And to stand in a corner and complain about what isn't doing as opposed to going across that room and introducing yourselves can be the difference oftentimes in success and failure. So as the elder statesman, I am going to thank all of you for being a part of this. John Hope Bryant, Taurus Richardson, and Christy Martin Rodriguez. I thank you for what we hope will just be the start of engagement to many people who are trying to find a bit more terra firma when it comes to wealth building. And we want to thank you for joining us. This is the first virtual town hall meeting of the year. There'll be many more to come, and we hope that you will join us then.
Thank you for joining us for tonight's Black Enterprise Town Hall on Shaping the Culture of Wealth. My name is Derek Dingle, Chief Content Officer for Black Enterprise. We hope you have gained valuable information and insight from this virtual experience and apply the principles, lessons, and examples from our panel's wealth memo. Their guidance will prove critical in securing your family's financial future. We would like to thank our dynamic moderator, Ed Gordon, an amazing collection of speakers, John Hope Bryant, Taurus Richardson, and Christy Martin Rodriguez for their impassioned and impactful conversation that will inspire us all to take immediate action. We would also like to extend our deep appreciation to our sponsor, Nationwide, for its role in producing tonight's program. Remember, you and others can engage in on-demand viewings of this session on blackenterprise.com, and we encourage you to share your thoughts and comments on our social media channels using the hashtag #BETownHall. Black Enterprise is the leading Black digital media brand, and as such, we present content offerings to enhance your business and financial lives. However, to further our advancement on all fronts, we must act now. Be on the lookout for the upcoming live event, our Women of Power Summit, hosted by Accenture at the Bellagio Resort in Las Vegas from March 27th to the 30th. For more information on our future events and town hall sessions, go to blackenterprise.com/events. Thank you for joining us and enjoy your evening.